During the regal welcome ceremony recently held in London, King Charles III walked beside French President Emmanuel Macron as the crowd erupted in thunderous cheers. But rather than focusing on the courteous smiles or the symbolic handshake between two heads of state, the global media became fixated on something far more subtle and far more unsettling: the bloodshot eyes of the king. Buckingham Palace responded with a smooth, sterile statement. But behind the ancient stone walls of the palace, another story was quietly unfolding. Camilla whispered orders to control the narrative. Prince William arranged a discreet meeting with the royal physician on a rain-soaked night. And Princess Catherine left behind a letter never sent, lines written with trembling hands weakened by chemotherapy. Behind the ceremonial lights and perfectly curated footage, a deeper fracture was spreading: a king confronting the outer edge of his endurance. A wife who was no longer just a silent supporter, and a son stepping into the weight of succession far earlier than anyone dared to admit. Those bloodshot eyes, were they a warning, a sign of something irreversible, or a silent farewell Charles could never bring himself to say? On the morning of June 25, 2025, the Horse Guards parade in London shone like a royal stage where light and color merged to honor a momentous day. The early sunlight, soft and golden, wove through the fluttering tricolour of France, and the Union Jack of Britain, proudly dancing in the resonant blare of brass trumpets and the measured steps of the Royal Guard. The air was thick with solemnity, as if nature itself was painting a perfect backdrop for the grand military ceremony. King Charles III, clad in a meticulously tailored deep green ceremonial uniform, stood to welcome French President Emmanuel Macron, whose confident smile and youthful vigor contrasted with the king's weathered presence. Two men, one a monarch bearing the weight of history, the other a president embodying modern dynamism, stood side by side, a symbol of the bond between their nations. But amid this dazzling spectacle, the eyes of the international press were not fixed on the fluttering flags or the courteous handshake between the two leaders. They were captivated, almost mesmerized, by a small but haunting detail: King Charles's bloodshot eyes, particularly his right eye, like a burst blood vessel, a stark anomaly that sparked curiosity across the globe. Reporters armed with sharp lenses and sharper pens seized the moment. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every line on the 76-year-old king's face, a face regal yet etched with the deep creases of time, the marks of a life under the unrelenting spotlight of royalty. "Is King Charles exhausted from a grueling schedule?" screamed a London tabloid headline paired with a magnified image of his bloodshot eyes as if they were a portal to a royal secret. "Is the king's health faltering?" an international news outlet speculated, its tone laced with intrigue, drawing readers in. On social media now, X hashtags like Monsieur King Charles Eyes and Royal Health exploded, fueling thousands of comments from genuine concern to wild conspiracies about illness or palace pressures. Some X-users speculated that the red eyes were merely a sign of age and a busy schedule. The media storm spread swiftly, turning a fleeting detail into the epicenter of global attention. In a rare moment after the ceremony, as Charles and Macron stepped into the banquet hall at Buckingham Palace, President Macron and his wife Brigitte discreetly expressed concern. In a quiet corner away from prying lenses, Brigitte gently asked Camilla, her voice tinged with worry, "Is His Majesty all right? His eyes, they don't look quite right." Macron, standing nearby, added in a low, sincere tone, "We just want to ensure he's not too fatigued after this visit." Camilla smiled the polished smile of a queen, but a flicker of tension crossed her eyes. "Thank you for your concern," she replied, her voice soft but vague. "It's just a minor issue, nothing to worry about. His Majesty is quite well." Her words, though courteous, did little to dispel the doubt in the Macron's gazes. They nodded, shifting to another topic, but the air in the room grew heavier, as if the secret Camilla guarded hung unspoken between them. Just hours later, Buckingham Palace issued a brief, icy statement to the press. "There is no cause for concern. It was merely a minor burst blood vessel, a common occurrence." The explanation, delivered with the smooth precision of a royal machine, seemed sufficient to calm the public and quell the media frenzy. Newspapers moved on to fresh headlines, hashtags faded, and the world returned to its frenetic pace. But within the long, shadowy corridors of Buckingham Palace, where the glow of crystal chandeliers never reached the hidden corners, the truth was far weightier. Charles's bloodshot eyes were not a random quirk, not the result of a sleepless night or an overpacked schedule. They were a sign of a carefully guarded secret known only to three people: Queen Camilla, Prince William, and the king's private physician, a man with a stern face and eyes that always averted direct contact as if afraid his gaze might betray too much. Behind the palace's closed doors, whispered conversations unfolded in the dark. Camilla, with the caution of someone who had weathered storms of public scrutiny, ordered the communications team to tightly control all information about the king's health. William, in sleepless nights, wrestled with anxiety about his father, wondering if he was concealing something far graver than the family had been told. And the physician, with a trembling voice, reported in clandestine meetings that Charles's condition was far beyond a minor burst blood vessel. The bloodshot eyes, though explained away by the palace, had unwittingly ignited questions the royal family could not suppress forever. Was the palace trying to hush up a truth that could shake the monarchy? The media buzz and social media speculation, though quickly stifled, marked a tiny crack in the royal facade, a crack that would soon lead to bigger questions. After the ceremony, as the trumpets fell silent and the crowds dispersed, Charles retreated to his private study at Buckingham Palace. The room, with its oak-paneled walls and the faint scent of old books, was his sanctuary amid the storm of royalty. He sank into a velvet-upholstered chair, his gaze vacant, as it drifted to the window, where gray clouds drifted slowly across the London sky, carrying an air of foreboding. On the desk before him lay a handwritten letter he had penned the night before, when relentless pain kept sleep at bay. The cream-colored envelope, sealed with red royal wax, bore a trembling inscription: "To William, my son." Inside were words inked in black, each stroke heavy with the weight of a dynasty. "My son, if the day comes when I no longer have the strength, remember that the throne is not a burden, but a light. I believe you will carry it further than I ever could, but I'm sorry for I couldn't give you more time to prepare." Charles touched the envelope, his fingers grazing the wax seal, as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. He recalled the long nights as Prince of Wales when his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, taught him that a monarch must always put the realm above self, that duty was a flame that must never die. But now, with his body betraying him and time turning into a merciless foe, he wondered, was he right to keep this secret, to let Camilla and William silently bear the weight of the truth? He folded the letter, tucked it into a polished ebony drawer, and locked it with a small silver key. He wasn't ready, not out of cowardice, but because he feared that when this letter reached William, it would mark the end of his own story and the beginning of a new chapter he would no longer lead. The bloodshot eyes of Charles, though a fleeting moment in the public's gaze, had become the focal point of unquellable speculation. Camilla's vague response to the Macrons, paired with the palace's curt statement, only fueled curiosity. In the days to come, questions about the king's health would continue to creep through the palace halls, onto newsstands and across phone screens. Camilla would face the pressure of guarding the secret, while William grappled with his fears for his father and his own looming responsibilities. And Charles, with each public appearance, would keep fighting not just his body, but the haunting question: what did those bloodshot eyes signify, and how long could he hide the truths? 4 months earlier, in a secluded treatment room at the London clinic, where no reporter could breach the layers of tight security, King Charles sat on a cold leather chair. The harsh white light from the ceiling bore down unforgiving as a judgment, highlighting his face, a face once resolute, radiating the steely determination of a man born to rule, now etched with deep wrinkles and an exhaustion no mask could conceal. His hands clasped tightly, slender fingers trembling faintly as if trying to hold back a tidal wave of emotion. Before him stood his private physician, a man with salt and pepper hair and eyes perpetually cautious, holding a thick medical file. His voice was low, each word sharp as a blade. "Your Majesty, the prostate cancer has spread to the lymphatic system. We are no longer in a phase of control. This is a race against time." Charles didn't interrupt. He sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the window where barren branches quivered in the chill of an east wind. Outside, London pulsed with life, its car horns and frenetic rhythm marking a city that never paused. But in this room, time seemed to stand still. The physician continued, his voice softer, almost a whisper. "We can try new methods, a trial drug combined with radiation. But it will be very difficult. Your body is weakening faster than we anticipated." Charles nodded, a gesture so slight it was barely perceptible. He asked no questions. He didn't need to. Deep down, he had felt the truth for some time, from the nagging pain in his hips, the endless sleepless nights, the moments he looked in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back. When the physician left, the door closed with a soft click, leaving Charles in stifling silence. He closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath, as if clinging to the last remnants of strength. Then the door opened again, and Camilla stepped in. She carried no regal air, only the tenderness of a wife who had stood by him for decades. In her hands were a warm cloth and a steaming cup of tea, the rising vapor like a silent comfort. She said nothing, merely placing a hand on his shoulder, wiping his cold hands with the cloth. Her hands trembled slightly, but she hid it well. In that moment, neither spoke, yet both understood. From this point forward, everything had changed forever. Charles broke the silence, his voice low but resolute, as if speaking to himself. "Let the people see me still able to step forward. Even if it's just a few steps." Camilla didn't reply. She only squeezed his hand gently, a small gesture that held an ocean of love and pain. From that day, she became the silent guardian of his health. She ordered his schedule trimmed, long overseas tours canceled, and a portable vital signs monitor discreetly sewn into his ceremonial attire, a tiny device that ceaselessly relayed his heart rate and blood pressure, a reminder that each step he took was a fragile miracle. She also commanded the head nurse, her voice cold but firm, no one is to utter the word metastasis in his presence. Not because Charles was unaware of the truth, but because she wanted to shield him from the cruel reminders of his dwindling time. Yet the truth, like a specter, slipped through the cracks. Each morning as he woke, Charles felt his body weaken bit by bit. The dull pain in his hips had spread to his back, like an invader claiming more territory. His sleep was fitful, waking him in the night drenched in cold sweat, gripped by an invisible fear. And his eyes in the mirror, once sharp, reflecting ambition and duty, now dimmed as if his very soul was fading. On a misty morning, as London lay cloaked in thick fog, Charles stood before the mirror in his Clarence House bedroom. He touched his face, his fingers tracing deep wrinkles, and whispered, "How much time do I have left?" No one answered, but the question lingered like a curse he couldn't dispel, haunting his mind. In the days that followed, Charles continued to appear before the public, his smile carefully rehearsed, his gait slow but dignified. But each time he stepped into the light, he felt the weight of the crown not on his head, but in his heart. And each time he looked into Camilla's eyes, he saw a pain she tried to hide, a love she never spoke aloud. He knew she was fighting for him, but he also knew this was a battle no one could win. In the drawing room at Clarence House, dim light from a crystal chandelier cast long shadows across the Persian rug. Prince William sat motionless in a velvet chair, his eyes glued to the television screen. The image of his father, King Charles III, flickered on the BBC broadcast of the ceremony, welcoming President Macron. His father's posture was slightly stooped, as if resisting an unseen wind. His face was pale, deep wrinkles, carved like scars. Yet his lips curved into a polite smile honed over decades to conceal every wound. William clenched his fist nails, digging into his palms. He knew all too well behind that smile were pains his father hid. Pains only a handful of trusted confidants were permitted to witness. The night before, as thick fog blanketed London, turning its streets into a dreamlike haze, the king's physician had arrived at Clarence House for a clandestine meeting. He entered carrying a hefty medical file, its stark white pages detailing Charles's condition. Cancer cells had spread from the prostate to the lymphatic system, an unstoppable invading force. The body's response to treatment was waning, and vital signs pointed to an irreversible decline. The physician, with grave eyes and a trembling voice, placed the file on the oak table. "Sir," he said, "if we don't announce this soon, when the crisis hits, the media will be uncontrollable. The public needs to be prepared. And so do you." William didn't respond. He stood and walked to the window where dew clung to the glass, reflecting the golden glow of streetlights. He gazed out at the darkened courtyard, where only the rustle of leaves broke the silence. In that moment, he was not the Prince of Wales, not the heir to the throne. He was just a son facing the prospect of losing the father he had always admired, despite the unspoken distances between them. He thought of his father, the man who had spent a lifetime preparing for the crown, only to be struck down by an invisible enemy the moment he wore it. He thought of his mother, Princess Diana, and her words about the monarchy being a golden cage, beautiful but suffocating. And he thought of himself, a father of three, a husband and a man soon to bear the weight of a nation on his shoulders. The next morning, William entered his father's office at Buckingham Palace. The air was heavy, as if the oak-paneled walls held a secret too great to voice. Charles sat behind his desk, weary but exuding regal dignity. Before him was a cold cup of tea and a stack of documents about Macron's visit. William stood silent for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking. He wasn't angry, nor did he blame. He looked straight into his father's eyes, his voice low but firm. "You don't have to carry the monarchy alone." Charles looked up, his bloodshot eyes glinting faintly. He offered a faint smile, but it couldn't mask his exhaustion. "If I stop, William," he said, his voice hoarse, "all eyes will still be on me. They won't see you, not right away. And then you'll face it, all the doubt, the comparisons, the chaos. Are you ready?" The question cut like a knife. William felt his chest tighten. He wanted to shout, to say he wasn't afraid to take on the role, that he had been preparing his whole life for this moment. But deep down, he wondered, am I truly ready? He opened his mouth, his voice trembling slightly. Have I prepared myself to bear those eyes? Silence enveloped the room, heavy and almost suffocating. Charles didn't answer. He only looked at his son, his gaze deep and troubled, as if trying to convey something words couldn't capture. William turned away, leaving the room carrying a mix of disappointment and pain. He knew his father wasn't afraid of death. What he feared was leaving a monarchy in turmoil and unfinished legacy. But William also knew no matter how hard his father tried, time was not on his side. In the days that followed, William began quiet preparations. He met with trusted advisors, those who had served Queen Elizabeth II and now stood by him. They laid out succession scenarios, reports on public reactions, and plans to ensure the monarchy's stability. But each night, returning to his family at Kensington, he sat silently by the fireplace, staring at photos of his parents and wondering, can I become the man my father expects? Can I be the king the people need? Each time he saw his father on television, looking increasingly frail, he wanted to run to him, embrace him and say, "Father, let me carry this. You've done enough." But he didn't, because he knew his father was a king, and a king never relinquishes duty, even when his body's breaking. Camilla, who once entered the palace amid a storm of controversy, now stood quietly in the monarchy's shadows, not only as Charles's steadfast support, but also as a shrewd strategist, silently shaping the royal family's future. To the public, she was the picture of devotion, always at the king's side. With a calm smile, her silver hair impeccably styled her gestures, gentle yet meaningful. But in the palace's hidden corners, where the glow of chandeliers never reached Camilla, was a silent warrior, a woman who not only protected her husband, but also deftly used the situation to solidify her own power. Under the guise of helping Charles through his final days on the throne, she was paving the way for an abdication, a move no one dared name, but one that would ensure her influence in the monarchy endured. At Burke Hall, during quiet afternoon, teas free from prying reporters, Camilla sat by the fireplace, its flickering flames casting light on her face, a face marked by time, yet her sharp eyes gleamed with the resolve of someone who had learned to survive on the edge of public scorn. She summoned her closest aides, those who had served the royal family for decades, and posed questions sharp as a blade. If a king must step down with dignity, what steps are needed to preserve his image? How do we ensure this abdication doesn't become a scandal, a stain on history? Her voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of someone not only planning for her husband, but also crafting her own legacy. Those questions weren't just about protecting Charles. They were the first steps to ensuring that when the throne changed hands, Camilla would remain a formidable force. No one answered immediately. The aides seasoned as they were exchanged uneasy glances, as if sensing that her questions weren't solely about Charles, but about her own power in the future. A former senior official with a soft but cautious voice finally spoke. "Your Majesty, this has no modern precedent. We'll need a detailed plan from public announcements to media management." But the king's will is paramount. Camilla nodded, her lips pressed tight, but her gaze was distant, as if peering into a future where she was not just the wife behind Charles, but the keeper of the monarchy's keys. Those questions marked a profound shift in Camilla's role. From a doubted queen, she was becoming a power broker, ready to face what Charles could not. In her handwritten journal, penned in green ink on thick pages, Camilla recorded her deepest thoughts. Under Burke Hall's dim lamplight, as the clock struck midnight, she wrote, "I don't want to see Charles die on the throne. He deserves rest to live his final days as a man, not a symbol. But if he lets go, I must ensure the monarchy doesn't crumble and that my place isn't forgotten." The words, trembling yet incisive, were the confession of a wife who loved her husband, but also a woman who understood the value of power. She folded the journal, locked it in a safe, as if fearing that if anyone read it, they would see not just her heart, but the ambition burning within. Camilla acted with a decisiveness few anticipated. She met with senior palace officials, from the king's private secretary to legal advisors, to discuss scenarios for a possible abdication. Each meeting was held in secrecy behind closed doors, with notes encrypted and carefully stored. She ensured every decision was made with respect and dignity, not only for Charles, but to bolster her image as a queen who was more than devoted, a queen with influence beyond her role as a wife. She also began writing handwritten letters to royal family members, not as formal announcements, but to prepare them for what was coming, while subtly reminding them she held the threads binding the monarchy. In a letter to William, she wrote, "My son, I know this burden is heavy, but I believe you'll rise to it, for your father has placed his trust in you, and I'll be here to ensure everything unfolds as it should." The words, though warm, carried a clear message. Camilla was not just a supporter, but a shaper of the future. She loved Charles, not as a king with a crown and scepter, but as a man who had fought fate his entire life, from the criticized days as Prince of Wales to his brief reign. That deep, unshowy love drove her actions. But beneath it, Camilla knew that helping Charles abdicate was not just an act of love, it was a lever to secure her own power. When Charles stepped down, she would not merely be Queen Camilla, the devoted wife. She would be the woman who guided the monarchy through a historic moment, ensuring her name and influence were etched in its legacy. Each night, sitting by Charles' bedside, listening to his faint breaths in sleep, she told herself, "I won't let him leave in pain. But I also won't let the monarchy forget me." That vow, both a promise to her husband and a declaration for herself, came from a queen who had mastered turning crises into opportunities. The night before the reception for President Emmanuel Macron, in the vast bedroom at Buckingham Palace, pale moonlight slipped through silk curtains, illuminating the etched face of King Charles III. He lay awake, eyes wide, staring at the intricately carved ceiling, where swirling patterns seemed to recount the tales of past dynasties. But Charles couldn't sleep, not because of documents awaiting his signature or security matters to review, but because of the relentless pain, like a smoldering fire, spreading from his hips to his right shoulder, gnawing at his very flesh. The doctors called it a side effect of the new treatment, a trial drug hoped to buy him a few more months, perhaps years. But Charles knew deep in his heart that his body was no longer cooperating. Each breath was a reminder that he was losing a battle he hadn't chosen. His private physician, a man with tired eyes and a perpetually cautious voice, arrived late that evening, carrying a small vial and a syringe. "Your Majesty," he said, almost whispering, "a strong dose of painkiller will help you get through tomorrow. The ceremony is crucial. You need to appear strong." Charles turned his face away, his gaze drifting to a silver-framed photo on the bedside table, a snapshot of him and his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, on a radiant summer day at Balmoral. "If it hurts," he replied, his voice rough as gravel, "it means I can still feel. I want to feel it." The physician didn't press. He bowed and left, leaving Charles with oppressive silence and unyielding pain. At dawn, as the first light broke, Charles stood before the mirror in his dressing room. His deep green ceremonial uniform, perfectly tailored, clung to his frame, but it couldn't hide his frailty. He looked into the mirror, and his right eye, red as old blood, like an unhealed wound, seemed to scream what he dared not say aloud. He touched the glass lightly, his gaunt fingers trembling as if trying to cling to the image of himself, the king he had striven to be. In that moment, he thought of his mother and her words in her final days. A king must never fall even when their heart is breaking. But Charles wondered, with a cracked heart and a failing body, could he keep standing? Before stepping out to the Horse Guards parade, he paused at the door where Camilla stood silently, her eyes betraying a pain she tried to conceal. She wore a turquoise coat, its elegance not just masking her worry, but serving as a carefully crafted shield, reinforcing her position as a queen unshaken by turmoil. Charles looked at her, his gaze softening, and whispered, "They'll ask questions. How they answer, that's the palace's concern." Camilla didn't reply immediately, but a faint smile crossed her lips, not just comfort, but a sign of her control. She touched his hand lightly, a gesture of love, but also a reminder that she held the reins behind the scenes. Then he walked out, leaving the room, leaving the shadows to face the glaring light of the parade ground and the waiting lenses. Hours later, when the ceremony ended, a Buckingham Palace spokesperson faced a throng of reporters with a practiced smile. "There's nothing serious," he said, his tone steady. "Just a minor burst blood vessel appearing overnight." The simple, smooth explanation was enough to quiet curious questions and sensational headlines. But behind the scenes, Camilla had orchestrated the communications team to prepare for any scrutiny, ensuring all eyes saw a stable monarchy and that she controlled the narrative. No one knew Charles had stayed awake all night, that the pain had nearly brought him to his knees before he stepped into the light. No one knew that standing on the parade ground as his eyes met Macron's, a man vibrant with youth, Charles felt a profound loneliness, as if standing alone in an ocean with time's waves slowly drowning him. In that moment, as trumpets sounded and flags waved, Charles was not just a king greeting a head of state. He was a man striving to preserve his final image, a portrait painted with blood and tears. Camilla, standing nearby, watched with eyes both loving and calculating, knowing each public appearance was a chance to solidify her role, not just as a wife, but as a queen shaping the future. Deep down, Charles knew the darkness was closing in, and no crown could hold it back. In a sterile white hospital room, where the scent of antiseptic mingled with stifling silence, the Princess of Wales, Catherine, battling her own cancer, sat by a window, her gaze fixed on London's grey sky. Chemotherapy had drained her, her once lustrous hair now thin, her hands once steady as they held her husband's in royal events, now trembling as they gripped a pen. But in rare moments of clarity, when pain subsided and her mind sharpened, she wrote, not to share with the world, not to comfort herself, but to reach a man she deeply respected, her father-in-law, King Charles III. She began the letter with slanted, delicate strokes, each word laden with meaning. Dear Father, guardian of the monarchy through history's tempests. She wrote of the months Charles had led the nation, his steadfastness through trials, and how he inspired hope in the public even as he battled silent pains. Then, with the sincerity of someone facing mortality, she wrote, if you stop, don't see it as failure. It's the final act of courage. You've done all a king could do. Now it's time to pass the light to others, to William, to the next generation. Each word cut into her heart, both painful and liberating. She thought of Charles, his warm smiles at family dinners, his gentle inquiries about her children with a simple fatherly love. She thought of William, her husband, striving to be strong for her and the monarchy, and knew he'd need every ounce of support for what lay ahead. But as she penned the final line, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, draining her strength. The letter remained unfinished, its draft left on the table beside a cold cup of tea and a framed photo of the family at Sandringham, laughing under a summer sun. Days later, Camilla visited Catherine in the hospital. She entered with a bouquet of white daisies, Catherine's favorite, and a smile calculated to be warm, yet regal, maintaining the distance of a queen. As Catherine slept, Camilla noticed the draft on the table. She picked it up, reading each line, and her heart seemed to stop. Catherine's words were more than a letter, they were a plea, a reminder that Charles didn't have to fight alone. Camilla stood still, tears streaming down her cheeks, the second time that month she cried for her husband. The tears were for Charles, but also for Catherine, for her strength in the darkest days. Yet deep down, Camilla saw the letter as more than a heartfelt message. It was a tool to strengthen her influence, a way to guide Charles toward a decision that would cement her legacy. She didn't alter or add to the letter, but her choice to bring it to Charles was not solely born of love. She stitched the pages with green thread, his favorite color, and placed them in a leather envelope, a subtle assertion of her role in every pivotal moment. She brought it to Buckingham Palace, placing it on Charles's desk before their Sandringham weekend, beside a book on botany he often read. She said nothing about the letter, but in her mind she knew that when Charles read it, he'd feel not just Catherine's words, but Camilla's presence, an act of love and a move to secure her influence. Catherine, in the days that followed, continued her fight against illness. She didn't know her letter had reached Camilla, but in her heart she hoped Charles would sense her message. In a rare moment, as sunlight broke through the hospital window and the sky glowed a vivid blue, she whispered, "You'll do what's right, Father. I believe in you." Her voice was faint, but it carried a fierce faith, a tiny flame unextinguished, even in the dark. No wind stirred that night. Windsor Castle, its ancient stone walls, witness to centuries of history, lay in an eerie stillness, as if the world held its breath to hear the faint pulse of a royal heart. In a small study, where oak bookshelves exuded the scent of time and faded Persian rugs told silent stories, King Charles III sat alone. This was the room where his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, once sat, her gaze resolute, penning her final Christmas messages, imparting hope and faith to the nation. Now Charles, heir to her legacy, faced his own darkness with a heart breaking and a body no longer obedient. Before him was an old oak desk, its surface worn smooth by generations of royal hands. On it sat a cold cup of tea, its steam long gone, leaving a faint ring on the wood. Beside it was Catherine's unopened letter, stitched shut with green thread, the color of Highgrove's fields, where he once found peace amid life's storms. Camilla had placed it there not just as a message from Catherine, but as a reminder of her own presence, the woman quietly shaping the monarchy's future. The leather envelope lay silently an invitation, a reminder of truths he could no longer avoid. The desk also held a schedule, its penciled lines faded, as if someone had meant to erase them, but stopped. Charles picked up a pen, his gaunt fingers trembling, lingering over Tuesday's empty slot. He stared at the blank space as if it were a doorway to a future he wasn't sure he belonged to. Finally, he drew 3 faint diagonal lines, a cryptic mark only he understood, a silent farewell, a surrender unseen by others. "When you know you're leaving," he thought, his gaze drifting through the lamp's dim glow, "you don't need a speech. You need a moment no one sees." The thought, like a gentle breeze, passed through his mind, carrying both pain and peace. He had lived his life under public scrutiny, under the crown's weight, under the world's ceaseless judgments. But now, with time running out, he craved a moment just for himself, a moment to be not a king, but Charles, a man with unfinished dreams and unspoken regrets. In the golden lamplight, Charles opened Catherine's letter. His fingers, once strong as they held reins or signed decrees, now trembled as he opened the envelope. He pulled the green thread carefully, as if touching a fragile treasure. The pages inside, with Catherine's slanted handwriting, flowed like a river into his heart. She called him the guardian of the monarchy through history's tempest, and the words stung his eyes. He read each line, each word slowly, as if to etch them into his soul. "If you stop, don't see it as failure. It's the final act of courage. You've done all a king could do. Now it's time to pass the light to others." Charles smiled, a sad but serene smile, like moonlight through fog. His daughter-in-law's words were more than a letter. They were a gentle wind soothing his breaking heart, reminding him he wasn't alone. But in that moment, he also thought of Camilla, not just the devoted wife, but the woman who placed this letter before him with subtle calculation to ensure he'd read it, feel its weight, and lean on her for the final decision. He folded the letter, pressing it to his chest as if to hold its warmth. He thought of William, his son, carrying both strength and fragility, preparing for a role Charles himself had once feared. He thought of Camilla, the woman who stood by him through years of public scorn, now deftly turning these painful moments into opportunities to solidify her place. A queen who knew power lay not just in crowns, but in silent choices. And he thought of his mother, who taught him a king rules not only with strength, but with sacrifice. "Mother," he whispered, his voice fading in the quiet, "I've tried, "But I'm tired." No one answered, but in that moment he felt a strange peace, as if she were somewhere smiling and nodding. The next day, Charles appeared at a small event at Clarence's house, a reception for charities he'd promised to attend. He wore a pale gray suit, his silver hair neatly combed, but his eyes, though no longer bloodshot, held a distant gaze, as if seeing a horizon no one else could. He spoke less than usual, his voice low and deliberate, each word carefully chosen. Camilla, watching from the wings, observed with a sharp gaze, ensuring every public glance was managed, every health question answered, with words she approved. When a reporter asked about his health, he offered only a gentle smile, no reply. No announcements were made about his condition. No changes appeared in his schedule. But within the palace, Camilla had ordered William's closest advisors, summoned, carefully chosen, to ensure the succession unfolded, as she envisioned, with her at the center of every decision. Scenarios were drafted, secret letters sent, all carrying a shared message: Charles's time was running out, and Camilla would guide the monarchy through this storm. The questions about the bloodshot eyes during Macron's visit, once a global sensation, had faded into the rush of news cycles. Papers moved to new headlines, the public to other stories, in social media to unrelated hashtags. But for those closest, Camilla, William, and Charles himself, that redness was never random. Camilla, with the cunning of one who survived harsh criticism, knew it was more than a sign of illness. It was a chance to assert her power, ensuring that when Charles left, she'd remain an indelible figure in the monarchy's history. It was the sign of a king preparing to say goodbye, not with grand speeches or public proclamations, but with a dignified silence, as he had lived his life. In a rare moment days later, Charles stood alone in Sandringham's garden. The rose beds he once tended were now wilted, but the sky above was strikingly clear, with white clouds drifting slowly toward the horizon. He looked up, breathing deeply, feeling the cool air fill his chest. He whispered, as if to himself or to those gone before: his mother, his grandfather, the distant figures of history, I've tried. Now it's time to rest. His voice was soft, but it carried a strange strength, like the final declaration of a man ready to face his fate. The bloodshot eyes of King Charles during Macron's visit were not just a fleeting moment in the news. They were a sign of a king facing his destiny, of a family grappling with pain, and of a monarchy at a historic crossroads. When England's history is written, Charles will be remembered not just as a king with a brief reign, but as a man, a father, a husband, a soul who chose to depart quietly, leaving light for those who remain. And Camilla, with her wisdom and ambition, will ensure history remembers her not just as a devoted wife, but as a queen who turned the most painful moments into opportunities to shape the monarchy. That redness in his eyes, like an unhealed scar, will forever remind us that even kings have hearts, feel pain, and know love. What do you think the bloodshot eyes of King Charles signify? Merely a sign of illness, or a deeper symbol of the royal family's inner struggles and secrets? Share your thoughts on this emotional journey of the British monarchy.